Hello again, friends. Welcome to another episode of Decision Masters Podcast. I am Kirsten Parker, your host and the host of this interview today. We have not had an expert interview in a minute, and I am so beyond jazzed to get into this conversation with Paige Ray. So you know what's in store. We talk about so many amazing things in this episode. What it means to be a creative, quote unquote, a creative person, a person who defines yourself and identifies as a creative. Paige Ray offers such a unique perspective on this subject that you might not have thought about very much because you might not be in a field that is typically thought of as creative, or you might not think of yourself as a creative person. We talk about your self-concept and making yourself the authority in your own life, what to do with the idea that it's too late. If you feel like life is moving quickly right now, this is a conversation you are going to get a lot out of. So you know who I'm talking to. Paige Ray did the branding for Kirsten Parker Coaching. So she owns Paige Ray Creative, which is a photo, video, and website design agency. I have to tell you, I've always been really intimidated by the idea of branding. And frankly, I've just never had the brain space for it. I always thought it was something that I might get to someday, but it really didn't ever come naturally to me to think of my brand identity and what that means and how it translates into everything from your photos to your website design and all this stuff that, you know, when you're starting a business, you're like, I just want to do my job. I don't want to work at figuring out all this other stuff that's outside my wheelhouse. And working with Paige Ray was such a transformative experience. Now I'm just plugging her business because if you've ever thought, I need to do a brand update someday, or you've kind of cobbled your website together like I did in the beginning, like I'll just take selfies and they'll be good enough for now. And I'll write my own copy and pick random colors and everything is fine. At least it's done. But you always thought you would need to do a professional update at some point. I'm telling you, do not wait and do it her way. I mean, do you make your own choices? But working with one person who's in charge of everything, she made it so easy. And she asked such thoughtful questions that really helped me get to know my business better. So if you go to my website and you see something or read something that makes total sense, that is all Paige Ray. And if you are really in the market for this kind of service, you can go to her website and you can look at the old version of my website and compare it with the new one. I want to say it makes me cringe, but it just makes me laugh and full of joy because we're all doing the best we can when we start out with this stuff. But to see the difference between them, I'm just, it brought tears to my eyes. So anyway, that's my plug. That's my intro to her. Let's dive into the conversation. Oh my gosh. Welcome to the Decision Masters Podcast. Paige Ray. Paige Ray Creative. I am so excited. Paige Ray Creative. Oh, that's what our conversation is going to start off with.
Yeah. Good.
I want you to say exactly what you said before we started recording so that I can capture it because it was so articulate. I was like, wait, I'm not recording yet.
Oh,
But you want to talk about creativity.
Yes, because I think about this all the time. How many people out there who are so creative that don't think of themselves as creatives when really we are all creatives? I mean, we are put here to make things and we all make different things, right? Some people make painting, some people make businesses, some people make families, some people, we're all making something different. Sometimes we're making more than one thing, but we are all creatives. If you're staring at a data spreadsheet and you're like, how do I conceptualize this so it's easy to read and understand? You're being creative in that nature. So we are all creatives. And I like to think of it that way because so many of us out there think, oh, I'm not a creative. A creative is a designer, a painter, blah, blah, blah. But truly, we are all creatives. And then also, a lot of people who are creatives and recognize their own creative nature often don't want to think about, oh, well, I have to be a business person too if I want to figure out how to live in my creativity and pay my bills with it or flourish with it. And so then they stay away from the nature of business and building a business. And so that conflict between all of those is really interesting. And I have so many thoughts, but we'll start
Yes. Can you tell that we're so excited to talk about this right now? So how does this show up for you personally? Because I know you work with people and maybe you can explain like how you work with people creatively because you have to live in between these two worlds of business, creativity, and finding the language around who are the people that your clients are representing themselves to be to the world,
Mhm.
right? So
Yes.
why don't you start there and explain what you do? And then I want to hear about how this whole conflict between who am I creative or not, has manifested in your life.
Absolutely. So I am Paige Ray, owner and founder of Paige Ray Creative. We are a photo, video, and website design agency, and we make a photo, video, and website design for your business that helps you stand out in your market, really highlighting the nature of you that makes you different from all of your competition. And to do that, we start with creativity. It is a creative act to start a business because you are solving a problem or you are doing something first better or different than what anybody has done before. And that
Mm,
always comes from a place of creativity and imagination and dreaming. And so when I'm sitting down with people and talking to them about that part of their soul and their mind, we start with dreaming bigger. Because what's so funny is I'm most of the time sitting down with people who, when I say, okay, what's the big picture here? We're not just going for like, okay, here's what's happening now. Let's make a photo shoot or a website that addresses your current circumstances. Instead, I'm
mm,
saying, what's the big dream? Because we want to make assets that support the big dream, right? And so often people will say something like, oh, I want to write a book one day, or I want to launch a course one day. And those are great goals. And I want to tell whoever's listening to this that those are both goals that you can do with it for in the next 6 months to 1 year. You can absolutely write a book, find an agent, find a manager, and get something published in the next 3 years. You can launch a course in the next 3 to 6 months. All of that is available to you. So when I talk about a bigger dream, a lot of times people aren't actually dreaming big enough. They're dreaming in the immediate and what do I want to
yes.
do next? But that bigger dream feels like something that will just form one day as a result of my continued actions instead of something we define and shape on purpose.
Right. And you said something just now that my brain was like, "Oh, fireworks." And it was to start a business is a creative act.
Mhm.
And I think even beyond starting a business, deciding what to do with your time. You're starting a business or you're choosing a job or you're continuing to choose the job you've been doing or you take on a new hobby. Whatever you're deciding to do with your time at its core is an
Mhm.
act of creativity because you're creating something out of nothing but intention, right? That's
Yes, and
wild to me.
right? And that's why I love your work so much is because it all the first thing that you do, whatever your imagination is dreaming up, whatever your creativity is solving, whatever you're doing with that vision that you have, step number 1 is a decision, right? And it's
Yeah.
not just like, "Okay, I think I'll do it." It's not just like, "I'm gonna put it on my list." It is a full-bodied driving straight toward the point with no other options available. We have made a decision and we are accepting nothing less than this decision, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's step 1. Like it's that kind of dedication that gets you anywhere. So step 1 is always decide the decision. It's like a big moment that once you make the decision, there's no going back kind of thing.
Mm. So how has this identity journey happen for you where if I understand your history correctly, you've not had a problem identifying as a creative person, but you have done a lot of different jobs and you've done a lot of different work with that creativity. So, have you felt a conflict between am I creative? Does that preclude me from being a business person? Am I a business person? Talk to me
Such a
about your
good
identity.
question. Okay, so this is such a good question because I grew up as a creative in the form of a writer. And when I went to college, I
Okay.
told myself, okay, I really want to be something creative, but I felt like there was no safe way to do that because the message in my head was starving artist. If I choose the path of a creative or an artist, I'm not going to be able
Right.
to like pay my bills. So I better choose something that's a little safer than that. So I did creative adjacent. Not that I didn't love journalism and being a journalist. I studied journalism and then I worked in media for about 10 years as a writer and an editor. And I loved it. I truly loved it. There was a specific moment when I knew there was something different that I wanted to do, when I knew I wanted to be more of a maker and a creator and less of a 9 to 5er.
Yeah.
And so I switched, but then I did it safely again. When I first became a photographer, I thought, well, I don't know if I would ever be accepted as a commercial photographer who works with brands. So I better be safer. I think I can do the wedding world. And I loved photographing weddings. It is a cool thing to be part of somebody's day like that. But wedding photographers have a little bit, I won't say it's an easy route. It's certainly not easy, but it's a little clearer on how you make money and sustain yourself within the wedding industry. So when I decided finally, you know what, I really want to go bigger with concepts and creativity and artistry, I think I want to switch into commercial work, which again, there's a lot of artistry and wedding work. I still love that world, but I wanted to do something more conceptual. I wanted to dream up a specific concept for each different brand. And that really excited me in a new kind of way. And when I made that switch, that's when I finally made a very dedicated decision to I'm all in on the being creative thing. So while I'd done
Mm.
it for 15 years beforehand, took me 15 years to get to a very dedicated path of, okay, I'm a full time creative. I need to accept myself as an artist before anybody else can accept me as an artist. But I do think there are other elements there. Like as a writer, I always did well as a writer overall because I grew up with the confidence to be a writer because everyone around me said, you're a good writer. You should do this.
Ooh, yeah, that's an
Right?
interesting
And
point. Yeah.
not everybody has that, and that doesn't mean they're not a good writer or creative or whatever else, but if you don't have that continued message of you can do this or you are good at this, it's a
Yeah.
whole different ballgame. I was very lucky to just have family and friends and teachers around me that consistently said like, "You're a great writer, you should do more of this." And so the more I got into creativity and being a photographer, I had to find that kind of confidence all over again because it wasn't the same situation. I had a lot of family and friends that were supportive, but it felt much scarier to do photography.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think that's so interesting. A lot of what I help people do in the decision making work is really figure out what are you deciding is the story you're telling yourself about who you are, that self
Mhm.
concept. And it's so interesting how often our defaults are here's what I'm not,
Mhm.
and how much of our lives can be shaped by this reticence, limitation, fear
Yes,
of allowing ourselves to see ourselves in some way. And I
exactly.
think what you're saying has a lot to do with it. Who have you been told you are your whole life? Who have you
Mhm.
been allowed to be? Are you allowed
Mhm.
to think of yourself as a good writer? Are you allowed to think of
Exactly.
yourself as a writer? And
Mhm.
I think that's a really powerful question to think of. Well, how are you thinking about yourself? What's the story you're telling about who you are? And also like
Exactly.
what's in there? What's in that story about who you're not?
Exactly. And there are so many ways that people around us inform who we're not. For example, I took a poll one time on my Instagram story. This was like years ago. And I was asking people, one, do you want to write? Like, do you want to write a book? Do you want to write something? And two, what's keeping you from that? And a lot of the conversations I got into in the DMs, the reason people weren't writing their project was because somewhere along the way, someone said, "You're not good at grammar, then you're not gonna be a good writer." Or you should
Oh,
it was like somebody
wow.
said to them, "Oh, you're not good at this." And that really dampened a lot of spirits for people. And the thing that actually stuck out to me was how many people said, "I'm not good at grammar, I wouldn't be a good writer," when good grammar is not the same thing as good writing. Those 2 things are so far apart, so
But
completely
somewhere
far
along
apart.
the line, someone told them
Mhm.
that, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
not allowed to have this identity of
Mhm.
you're a writer
Mhm.
unless you check these boxes, you meet these criteria.
Exactly, and I wanna be clear, like, I fully support teachers, I love teachers. Usually
We're
the
not
story
anti-grammar.
usually the story comes in the form of, "Oh, I had a teacher one time that scolded me
Yeah.
about grammar, and so it made me scared to write." I think is really more of what was happening. And so there's a lot of conversation to be had about the fact that like, for a lot of people, it's never occurred to them that grammar is not the same thing as writing. Those are two separate things. And you can be great at writing and bad at grammar. And in the end, it doesn't matter. If you're writing a good story that people want to read, someone else can take care of the grammar for you. And I think that's
Mhm.
a good example of our stories get built by us, but also by external things outside of us that we don't even see coming and we don't even know that we can extricate ourselves from or pull ourselves out of. And I think that's worth examining too. What story am I carrying around that might not even be real or accurate that somebody else kind of built for me?
Yeah. What has imprinted that
Mhm.
you may not have questioned up until this point because it came from a really reliable authority source,
Yeah.
or it has felt really true or it looks like it's true for other people, but is it worth questioning?
Mhm.
Because it's a really standout obstacle between you and what you say you want to do or
Exactly.
feel or be. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And the funny thing is, the once you start exploring those stories and asking yourself, well, is it possible that this isn't true? And if it's not true, then what could be true? Once you start asking those questions, it gets real interesting because you realize that almost anything that you've told yourself about why you shouldn't do something is just not true. It's just not,
Ugh.
I've never met a
I
true,
need
yeah.
everybody to hear that.
Every single time when you start examining the stories that you're telling yourself that keep yourself from doing something, the story that's standing in the way, that story is rarely, if ever, and probably never true. There's
Yeah.
just no reason that you can't do the thing that you want to do at all.
Woof.
Mhm.
It's like a mic drop situation. It's such a gut punch to question those stories.
Mhm.
We call them stories because we speak
Mhm.
personal development, but they can feel like facts. They can feel like
Mhm.
rules.
Mhm.
They can feel like legitimate criteria that we do not meet the qualifications for. So we therefore logically, logistically,
Mhm.
literally cannot be a writer. I heard this phrase once that's always stuck with me. Notice when you're arguing for your limitations.
Yeah.
We get so attached to
Mhm.
these ways of viewing the world because that's how humaning works. It's not a personal failing. It's really
Mhm.
like the world wouldn't make sense if we didn't attach to these paradigms. So it's not a problem, but we get so attached to them that we ultimately find ourselves defending,
Yeah.
here's why I can't have what I want. Here's why I can't be what I want. That's when we really need some outside voice or perspective to lovingly shake us a little bit.
And you know what? Okay, so this is something I think about a lot because I think a lot of people and listener, if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, yeah, I've heard it before, like, oh, my limiting beliefs, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I hear you. I think about this a lot. Why is it that sometimes we will recognize these stories and these defaults and these beliefs, but still not be able to dismantle them? And I finally came to the conclusion of it wasn't until I recognized myself as the authority figure in my brain that I was able to really stop believing these stories. I had to give myself
Mm.
permission to be the one that makes the decision, signs off on it, approves it, calls the shots on it. That sounds so simple. And that sounds like, well, of course, nobody else is my authority figure. But if you're ever worried about what other people think, or am I going to flop on this? Then it's not that you're just letting everyone else run your life, but you might not have decided yet that you are simply the authority figure for your own life. And that is
Yes.
where we start. Yeah.
Okay, we have to throw confetti for that. This is
Right.
on my mind. So, oh, there's confetti on my mic. That's so spot on. And I love that you bring that up too, because I am speaking at this Ivy League Sisters Global Summit. I'm one of 6 speakers. And my section that I'm leading, it's on the power of self authority. And I love that you phrased it the way you did because it feels reckless to just decide. And I was just thinking about this the other day with a client who they were like, I'm terrible at business. I'm not a good business person because I never keep track of expenses. I don't track anything. And I was like, okay, I pay every month for QuickBooks. I
Mhm.
have a box that I put receipts in. That's me tracking. I do
Yeah.
nothing. But this is
Mhm.
what our conversation was. Like, I have the authority to decide, is this important in
Exactly.
me calling myself a good business person? Like, my taxes get done. It's
Exactly.
fine.
Yeah. You can
So
hire
that
somebody to be good at
authority
that.
piece, yes, it's like giving yourself permission to just
Mhm.
be the decider in your own
Yes.
head of, does this matter? What does this mean? How meaningful is this? It's everything. But it's
Yeah.
really hard because it feels like, wait
Yeah.
a minute, am I going to get in trouble? Like, is someone
Yes.
going to tell me I'm
Yes.
wrong?
That's exactly what it is because we think to ourselves so often like surely there must be somebody who knows more than me about this. I can't call myself the authority of my own life. Surely there are places that can be outsourced. But in this world, there is not a single person who walks around knowing what they're doing for sure. For the most part, we're all just making our best guess about the next step. And that's iffy.
1000%.
Right? That's iffy for most of us, but the people that you're looking up to, the people that are on the stages, are writing the books, or making the big businesses, none of them were appointed to where they are in their industry or where they are
Right.
in their leadership. They decided one day, I am going to apply to speak on this stage. They looked at their first stage and they went, I don't have the sizzle reel yet. I don't have other speaking experiences, but I just want to do this. And somebody said yes to them at some point. And that's how every single person does it. Nobody appoints the people that are there. Like they decide on their own, you know what, I'm just going to go for it. And that part's really scary, especially when it comes to running your own business, because the thing that hits you after 6 months to a year is that at first you're like, yes, I don't have a boss. But then you're like, oh crap, I don't have a boss. Nobody's going to tell
Uh-huh.
me what should be on my to do list. Nobody's going to tell me if
Nope.
I did this well or if I did this badly. You're your own authority within your own business. That's a hard
Yeah.
adjustment. And so it's an equally hard adjustment within your own mind when you're dismantling these stories and beliefs. Like you also have to decide, I'm going to be the authority that gives myself permission to not believe this anymore and instead believe that.
And it's hard work. I never want to give the impression that mindset stuff should be easy and you should just be able to choose to
Mhm,
stop doubting yourself. I think that's why it's really valuable to meet yourself where you are in
mhm,
terms of what stories were you told, were you taught about who you are, what you're capable of, what you deserve.
mhm.
Because it's very easy to wake up and you're
Yeah.
40 and you have always wanted to write a book, but
Mhm,
you haven't been conditioned to
mhm.
think that you deserve it, you're capable of it. So you have, unfortunately, some extra work to do in this kind of self belief, self authority, permission department. It's doable work, it's work you
Yeah.
can do,
Yeah.
it's beliefs you can change, but the hard part of humaning, right?
It really is, and everything goes so much faster than you think it will. I really did wake up on my 40th birthday like, "Oh my god, I am 4 how did that happen?" It goes by so fast, and you hear that all through your 20s, all while you're growing up as a teenager, "Enjoy being young, it goes by so fast," but it really does go by so fast. There will be a day when you wake up in your 60s, in your 70s, in your 80s, and it won't necessarily be too late, but what I've done at 40 is I've thought to myself, how much time did I spend doing this thing where I talked down to myself or
Mm.
I told myself I wasn't capable when I could have been doing the thing I really wanted to do? How much time did I spend telling myself, "Oh, you could never be a full-time artist," when it turns out I really perfectly could be. I spent
Mm.
10 years telling myself, "No, I could not do that." And they certainly weren't a wasted 10 years. I definitely learned a lot of lessons there, but it goes by so much faster than you just ever think it will. And, it's really at the end of the day, it's going to be your life and nobody else's. I think a good comparison to this is weddings, right? Your wedding is going to be your wedding. You should always do what you want to do on your wedding day because it needs to feel like yours. It's your special day. You should make the decisions that make you happy instead of letting everybody else come in and tell you what you should do on your wedding day, right? And that is easier to identify with because if you've ever planned a wedding or been part of it, you get like, no, this has got to be what I want to do. And it's
Mhm.
actually the same way with your life. At the end of the day, everyone around you is going to have an opinion on how you live your life and the decisions that you make, but they don't have to go to sleep with that and they don't have to wake up and live that the next day. You do. So don't let other people's doubts and honestly projections decide what you do with your life. It'll go by faster than you think. And here's hoping that you did what you wanted to do.
Yeah, it's precious.
It is.
I mean, you're preaching to the choir because, as you know, Kenny and I were like, well, for our wedding, we want to go on vacation by ourselves.
Yes. Yes.
And we did. And it was 100% perfect. And
Mhm.
we could do a whole other podcast on wedding decisions. I know a lot of people have brought situations with, like, no, I really can't. I really have to do this. I really have to, blah, blah. And
Right?
I just reiterate that Tahiti is an 8-hour direct flight from
Mhm.
LA, and you could be in Bora Bora very quickly, and no one has to come with you if you don't want.
Exactly, you can do whatever you want. That's what me and my partner did. Now, if you're hearing this episode and you've been in my social media world, you might know that I eloped in Vegas on Halloween, and I loved every moment of it. Yes, and that was the decision that was so right for us. And if I had gone around and said to everyone around me, "What do you think that we should do?" I would have gotten 20 different answers, but also
Yeah.
20 different ideas of what that person would have done if they were me, but nobody else is me. I'm gonna be the one that wakes up the day after the wedding and ask myself, am I happy with how that went? So
Yeah. It
much like
really is
what
your party.
it
Like,
is.
literally, if we're talking about a wedding, and figuratively, if we're talking about your life.
Mhm.
So, what do you think? Because I never thought of myself as a creative person, even though my whole career for like 15 years or however long I did it was in theater stage management. I only spoke with creative people. I've never applied for a real job. Like, I never had a regular resume. And
Mhm.
yet it came up all the time. I don't remember why. Maybe in grad school, there was this kind of philosophical conversation that would pop up every once in a while of our stage managers creative.
Mhm.
I was like, no, we're the taskmasters, we're the organizers, all this stuff that I'm like, now I'm looking at my home edit book here and I'm
Mhm.
obsessed with organizers and fully identify with it as a creative practice. But I
Yes.
think I really struggled with accepting
Mhm.
that that was true for me. I was a creative person and I needed creativity in my job. And I think it really held me back at the beginning of this business building because, again, I was so focused on what am I not?
Mhm.
And really trying to be clear cut
Yeah.
about that.
Mhm.
So I'm curious what you would say to someone if they maybe are not a painter or a writer and they don't really see the need to see themselves as a creative person and they're either running a business or they're doing a job. But I'm curious what you would say.
So I love this because when you talk about just your work and how you didn't first think of yourself as a creative, I can't think of anything more creative than making a decision because it requires you to use your imagination on the different paths that you can go down. When you
Yeah.
make a decision, it's because you've got multiple options in front of you. You have to choose one. You have to decide. And in order to do that, you have to be able to imagine what might happen and what might unfold from each of those to begin with. It takes imagination, and imagination is creativity, right? That's what all creatives are using as a default is just our imagination. It's being creative is really sitting down and being willing to picture a different world or a different moment.
Mhm.
And there's no specific way that any of that has to look. I do think that every act of imagination is a creative act. And I think that's what gets people caught up because much like we talked about earlier, we have let there be an external definition of creativity, right? Well, the world has defined creativity as painting and design and XYZ. But
Right.
when you go back and say, well, what if that's not true? What if creativity is, I love making the flow of an Excel spreadsheet? I think that's pretty cool. It's not easy, it's definitely a skill. And that can be a very creative task because what you're imagining is the delivery of information and how best to set that up for people. Like you are still using your imagination there. And I think all
Yeah.
of us use our imaginations on a daily basis and in whatever our work is in front of us. So, yes, that's basically what I would say is like, did you imagine something today? Did you have to imagine a different world or a different moment or a different day or a different option? That's being creative. You're creative.
Mm. And I think that there's just a freedom in that. You can think of yourself however you want, but I question the value of thinking of yourself as not a creative person. I wonder what you're getting out of that. You know what I mean?
That's such a good question. I wonder how somebody would answer this. Something that has been on my mind a lot is I've been thinking about how we really in the 90s made a transition out of the idea of selling out. Like in the 90s, the idea of being an artist and selling out was the big thing. Like putting the idea of making money behind your artistry was considered selling out. And of course, it's more nuanced than that. But there were like songs and there was like a whole
Heck
conversation there,
yeah.
right? But as we moved into really the later 2000s and the 2010s, and people started saying, you know what, I want to be an artist and I want to pay my bills and I want to build a business and I want to reach other people, the idea of selling out really faded into the background as we made
Yeah.
room for more of the business side of it. And I think that's really, I don't know, I think that's a really interesting thing. So part of me feels like if people are resistant to the idea of being a creative, maybe that has something to do with the idea of in their minds, maybe being a creative has to be one thing and it has to mean one thing, and anything else is close to maybe not selling out, but is going off a path that was otherwise defined.
It did. It
Mhm.
totally did change.
Right?
I'm thinking of like Selena Gomez. She's a musician and an actor and a producer and has a makeup line. You couldn't sell more things. Yeah.
Right. And
And
it's
I think
really when was the last time you heard somebody say, oh, what a sellout? I haven't heard that in a
No,
decade.
now it's good for them. Way to
Mhm.
make that Disney money or whatever.
Exactly.
Whoever you got a contract with.
Mhm.
I think that people like us and people who listen to this podcast are interested in anything we can do to stop limiting ourselves and making ourselves smaller, but also easy ways to make life richer
Mhm.
and more enjoyable and just feel more present because we're all going big places, dream big, like you said. But we also don't want to live in this mode where we all probably used to live, which is sacrificing our daily experience and hustling and grinding and stressing out all the time. And I'll feel better later next decade. And I
Yeah.
think that this whole embrace how creative you actually are thing that we're talking about
Mhm.
is a super effective way to make your everyday life richer.
Mhm.
Because if you think of yourself as a creative person using creativity and you start looking for opportunities to use your creativity, or you start looking for evidence that, wow, that was a creative thing I did or solution I came up with or way that I thought, there's a richness to that that I think allows us to feel like we are more special,
Yeah.
more unique,
Mhm.
less cookie cutter 9 to 5ers, business grinders, the plain grayscale version of the story of
Yeah.
ourselves. That's a fun idea that I've never really thought about before.
Yeah.
If you can see yourself as the creative that you are,
Mhm.
how does that spice up your life? How does that
Yes.
deepen your experience of your day?
It brings in that richness and that texture that I feel like so many of us are craving in so many different ways because the funny thing about life is the older you get, the more kind of monotonous you get. You get into your routines, you know what you
Mhm,
have to get done, and you get set in those ways. And that's not necessarily a bad thing by any way, but then
mhm.
you start looking for what would bring back that feeling of novelty in my life that I haven't felt since the first time I picked up a camera, since the first time I
Yeah.
you know what I love as a remedy for that? I love to pick something that I'm bad at and just do that badly. Like I love
Oh,
I'm not good at drawing and sketching. Man, would I like to be. I went back to school for photos like 10 years ago and I started by just taking art classes.
yeah.
And but I happen to be good at photos, but I took sketching, I took painting, I took all of the things. I was not good at any of them. I quickly found out. But these days, when I feel like, where's the spark? Where's the inspiration? How do I get out of this rut? I will pick up my sketchbook and I will
Mm,
try to draw something. I never do it well, but that's the point is let me go do this thing badly. It makes my brain work in a different way. It gives me something
yeah.
new and novel, you know? So I think the other thing that we think about when we're thinking about creativity is doing it well. We're here to be creatives, but we're not here to do it perfectly or do it well a lot of the time.
Yes. I love that. Being a beginner at something, just letting
Mhm.
yourself be a beginner.
Yes.
And then the awe moments. Positive psychology has a lot to say on the impact that feeling awe has on your well being,
Mhm.
on your sleep, on your longevity. More moments of awe.
Mhm.
Yes,
And
please.
you can get there by doing things not well because if you do things not well enough, if you keep going doing things badly, one day you're going to do it pretty darn good. You're just going to get better and that'll give you that awe moment of like, "Oh my god." Every once in a while I'll sketch a face and I'm like, "Wait a second. That's pretty good." I probably wouldn't hang it up anywhere, but it gives me a moment of like, "Oh, yeah."
Yeah, it adds lightness too. The less stingy you are with your creativity, I think there's a lightness and you can take yourself a little less seriously. You can be a little less urgent. And
Mhm.
I mean, speaking just for myself with my anxious brain, the less I can take seriously, the
Mhm.
better my life gets.
Oh my that is the truest thing. That's what I always remind myself whenever I'm having a worse day, I have to examine things and be like, "How much of this deserves to be a worse day, and how much of this am I
Yeah.
just making too serious?"
Oh my gosh. I could talk to you about this for hours. I'm so grateful for your brain and your openness. Tell us where to find you. And then I have my 3 interviewee questions for you.
Okay, awesome. If you find me on Instagram at Paige Ray Creative, what you're gonna get from that is you're gonna learn how to pose in photos in a way that actually makes you feel good about yourself and looks
Which
really
I've
awesome.
done. Like, I learned so much even before we were working together. As I said in the intro, Paige did my whole website, branding, everything. she talked me through all the photos, but the value you get in a freaking 45-second clip of you, this is what to do, this is what not to do. It's so concise and it's like, "Oh my god, I
If
needed
you've
to know
ever
that."
Exactly. If you've ever been like, what do I do with my hands in photos? Don't you worry. I got you. Go check out my Instagram. I have like 5 different answers for you, plus other poses. And I do the same thing on my TikTok at Paige Ray on TikTok. And at the very top row, you'll see my biggest, best posing tips. And apparently, other people agree that those are great posing tips. That's why they're pinned to the top. So you'll get a lot of silliness and a lot of lightheartedness because at the end of the day, being in front of the camera is not that serious. It should be fun. It should be like a really good time. I want you to figure out how to be more visible because I think that's important. Whatever you're doing for your work, your creativity, your purpose in the world, visibility plays a role in some way, whether it's I need to learn how to use my voice, or I need to spread my message, or I need to build a website so people can learn more about XYZ. Visibility plays a big role in that. So, of course, how we hold ourselves in front of the camera, big role. But at the end of the day, don't overthink it. Have some fun. You deserve to have some fun in your visibility.
Don't overthink it. Words to live by.
Yeah.
It's a struggle, but you can do it. If people wanna hire you, do you wanna do the highlight reel of the kinds of things that you are up to?
Yes, our signature thing that we do is photo, video, and website design as one package. It's called the Branded Business Suite, and it's entirely focused on what is your special sauce. Even if you think, "Oh, I don't have it. Yes, you do. You do have a special sauce. And I say this from having sat down with at least 200 plus creative entrepreneurs, most of whom have said to me, I don't know, nothing really makes me different. I beg to differ, and we're going to find it. And we take that special sauce and we turn it into an entire brand that fully stands out in your market with creative web and visual assets.
And that's the one I recommend because you make one decision to just hire Paige Ray, and
Yes.
then she guides you through the whole thing. Like, I literally can't imagine. I know it works for other people, so you're not wrong for doing it the other ways, but I don't know how people hire a photographer and then they hire a graphic designer and then they hire a website. Like, I don't
Yeah.
have time or
It's a
brain space
lot,
for all of
right?
those
How
things.
many Exactly, like, at the end of the day, like, how many people do you really wanna be emailing? Or you could email one person. That's me.
Yeah. Yeah. So all of that is linked in the show notes, all of Paige Ray's website and socials. And then do you have time for my questions? They
Yes,
can go fast. Okay.
absolutely. Okay.
Have you ever worked with a coach? And what is your advice for someone who's thinking of bringing someone onto their team?
This is okay, I love this. I've worked with a few coaches over the years, and I think about my last coach. She was both a writing coach and a business coach, and her focus
Mm,
was really like, you run a business and you want to write a book on the side. I got you. Like that was her whole thing. And I think almost all of us want to do that. I think it was a fantastic way to conceptualize that. So I joined her program and I loved it because she always returned our authority back to us.
yeah.
And I think that was what was so powerful about it. And there are a lot of things that I like about coaching, and I like that coaching it gives you mental options. A lot of the times when we're stuck in those stories, it's because we think we don't have the option to do something else or
Yeah.
choose differently, right? But coaching really it returns our authority back to us and it gives us the options that we didn't realize that we had. It gives us the different ways of thinking and perspectives that we didn't know were available to us or we thought were only available to other people. And they're not, they're available to us too. And I think that's a really powerful moment to be in to expand in that way.
Yes. Oh, I love that answer. Return your authority back to yourself. Delish. Okay. My second question is, what kind of decision maker would you describe yourself to be today?
Ooh, I am a gut decision maker. I know fast. It's right in my gut. And if it ever takes me longer than a short amount of time to make a decision, it's because I'm doubting myself and my
Mhm.
ability to do something. And so that's become interesting. Now that I know how I make decisions, I also then can see where I am holding myself back. So I know I'm a gut decision maker. I know I can feel it and I just have to trust myself in that. And that gets scary sometimes because when you actually listen to your intuition and what is inside telling you that you know you can do, then sometimes you have to get out of your own way in order to do it. And that's scary and hard. I usually know immediately what's right for me and what's not. So if I
Mm.
know what's right for me and I'm not saying yes yet, it's usually because there's a story that's standing in my way. There's a doubt that's standing in my way. So I love that question. See, decisions are so powerful, and how you make them is powerful.
It's so much fun. And then on that note, would you like to share a self-honoring decision that you've made in the last week-ish?
Oh my God. I love this question. Okay. So the self honoring decision that I made was to say, you know what? I don't want a traditional wedding. I want to elope. I want to go to Vegas. I want to make it fun. I want Elvis to drive us around in a pink Cadillac.
Oh my
That,
god.
oh my God. I'm so excited. I
You
can't even
know
tell
that
you how.
part.
I know, right? I'm so excited. I was really like, you know what? Let's have some fun. Let's really do things our way. And that was really a self honoring decision. And gosh, this is such a good question because now I'm thinking about, have I been honoring myself? How often do I really do that? Because part of the reason it's so fun is because I feel like I don't always do that for myself, saying yes to myself and doing what I
Yeah.
really want to do. You know what I used to do all the time that I should start doing again is I used to just go away for the weekend whenever I felt like it. I would just get in my car and
Oh,
say, you know what, I'm going to
yes.
go to Santa Barbara and just have a weekend to write, walk around, or have a glass of wine and watch the sunset. That is one of my favorite self-honoring decisions is like mini vacation. I love that one.
Oof. We joined one of the wineries up in San Ynez just for that excuse of making it super easy to
Ah,
go away. You have to come with
mhm.
us one time.
That would be amazing.
It's beautiful. So, but I love this question too. Obviously, I
Mhm,
ask it everybody, but I love it because it helps train your brain to notice what are
mhm.
the self-honoring decisions that you're already making. And it's so valuable and fun to call them out. Like, this is
Yes.
self-honoring decision. This is what I'm doing. Noticing when you're doing it is so valuable. And then it also helps you pay attention to, ooh, when I'm not doing it. And then you can just shift where
Yes.
you need.
You know what's a self-honoring decision that I see people avoid a lot is taking on the title that they've done the work to become, but are too scared yet to say, I am this. I've been thinking about this.
Ooh,
Like when I switched from journalism to photography, it took me 3 years. I hadn't been a journalist or a writer for 3 years, but it took me 3 years to start saying, I'm a photographer
oh,
confidently. And so switching, I guess that could be switching identities, but I think that's a self-honoring decision that I see a lot of people hesitate on. But hey man, if that's what you are, that's what you are. If you are a photographer, if you are an artist, if you are creative, if you are writing every single night your book and you haven't told anybody because you're afraid to say out loud, I'm a writer. Well, my friend, you're a writer, even if you
I
haven't said it before,
know.
right? So
That's so funny. For at least 6 months when I stopped stage managing, I started coaching. When people were like, oh, what do you do? I would say, I used to be a stage manager. It's
yes,
so weird, but
that's how
it's
it comes. Yes.
normal.
Yeah, that's what it was, is I would be like, "Oh, I used to be a journalist. I used to be a writer."
Yeah.
And what's funny is I never got anybody who say, "Well, if that's what you used to be, what do you do now?" Nobody ever questioned
Yeah,
that.
people accept the invitation that you send them. So if you invite them to think of you as not this,
Mhm,
that's the easiest thing for them to do. So everybody out there listening, if you've been hesitating to call yourself a creative
mhm,
or a writer or a this or a that or a good business person, whatever,
mhm.
I think the moral of today's story is it could be the self-honoring decision you make today to just own it.
Absolutely. I love that.
Thank you so much. I could talk to you for
Thank
hours.
you.
Everyone, go follow Paige Ray. All of the socials and links are in the show notes. Thank you so much for your
Thank
wisdom
you
and your
so
time.
much. This has been a blast. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Hey, want to find out your decision style? Obviously, go take